Hello, everyone. My name is Lionel Sander from Pembroke Publishers, and thanks for joining us this evening. Just before we get started, I would like you to know that Pembroke Publishers' head office is situated upon traditional territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Hiawatha First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and the Métis Nation. And the treaty covering this area of land in Toronto, Ontario is collectively known as the Williams Treaties of 1923. And I wish to recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous peoples across this land. We seek a new relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, one based in honor and deep respect. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, the first of, the start of the 23-24 school year. And either to my right or left, depending, or up or down, depending on how the screens are our cameras are on your screen, is Diane Vetter. And Diane Vetter had a career in education that spans almost 30 years. And she's worked in a range of educational environments, including elementary school classrooms, ESL environments, in military and community settings. Diane has also spent a number of years at York University teaching and supporting teacher candidates and their mentor teachers. Diane is the author and talking tonight about her newly published book, Students Mentoring Students in K-8 Classrooms, Creating a Learning Environment where Children Communicate, Collaborate, and Succeed. I must say, Diane, I haven't mentioned this to you before, but I mentioned to my youngest son that I would be doing this webinar tonight, and he was like a huge fan of mentoring and talked about one of his teachers who was so good at it and felt like it was one of the most important pieces of his middle school career was sort of learning how to mentor and work with other students. So you come highly recommended by my son in terms of mentoring and the importance of it. She's also, and you may have attended her last webinar a while back with Pembroke, where she co-authored the book Mentoring Each Other, Teachers Listening, Learning, and Sharing to Create More Successful Classrooms. She's also been the author of a number of journal articles, book chapters, AQ courses, and teacher and curriculum guides. Her research has focused primarily on classroom communication and collaboration, mentoring, and inclusion in classroom settings. And although she's recently retired from York University, Diane continues to be an active contributor to the field of education, and you can find her blogs on the Literacy Today website of the Quebec Ministry of Education. And she also supports the new Teachers Induction Program in her local school board. And somehow, there still seems to be a little bit of time to continue to keep up with the recent educational practices that are emerging, especially here in Ontario. But she also has, and probably number one on her list, 3 grandchildren that she spends a time with, both where her children live. And so, Diane, it's great to have you join us here this evening, and I'll pass the virtual mic over to you.
Thank you, Lionel. And hello, everybody, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always wonderful to see so many people who, particularly just before the school year begins, are taking an interest in professional development, in learning more about learning, and in learning more about teaching, and just how they can make the experience richer for the students in their classrooms. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And we can get started with the first slide, Lionel. So for those of you that are familiar with the first book and perhaps have already had a chance to glance at the second one, you'll know that much of my work comes from the stories from my own classroom and stories from the classrooms that I've had the honor to visit over many years working with teacher candidates and their mentors at York University. And as Lionel mentioned, I've also had a fairly varied experience in the education field. And I originally began teaching ESL and actually for the Canadian government in a military setting when countries in the Eastern Bloc that were formerly with the Soviet Union were joining NATO, and their very high-ranking military officers needed to learn to speak English. And so these were people with at that time, far more educational qualifications than I had. But they all had a need to speak English and were not fluent English speakers. And so my challenge at that time was to think of ways how I could really engage these people who, highly intellectual, huge life experiences, and, sort of traditional type teaching was really not applicable in that setting. And so what I did is I developed something that's kind of become my mantra over the last few years. And that is to create teaching experiences for students that are authentic, meaningful, and purposeful. And so what I mean by that, if we start with purposeful. So there's something useful about the activity for the students, something beyond just because I have to and because the teacher needs to read it and because it's in the curriculum. And so there needs to be something purposeful for what we're asking our students to do. And then the next piece about that is meaningful. So what does meaningful really say to us? Well, it's basically talking to relevance. So something that's relevant to someone who has, master's or a PhD degree in military from an Eastern country, is going to be different than somebody else. And so we have to really look at our students as individuals, and we have to decide, how we can best create curriculum or meet curriculum expectations that are relevant to them. And then the last piece was authentic. And it needs to be something that's authentic, not just something that's created, sort of a fake piece in the classroom. And so every year I tried to sort of just create a little something different that was woven through our lessons. And the example that I can give you from this military group was they created a travel guide for future officers who would be coming to Canada from their countries to learn English. And the travel guide included, things like how to rent a car, the best places to eat in the area, what places to go shopping to get souvenirs or things that their kids were looking for that they could bring home for them. And so they had numerous topics like that in their travel guide, and they prepared it, they published it, and it was actually printed and handed out to subsequent classes. And so it became really meaningful, purposeful, and it was truly authentic for them. And so if you're into acronyms, which many of us are in education, I think, so much in education. I'm from Ontario. We have, our teacher federations, ETFO and OECTA. We have our school boards, TDSB, TCDSB. I mean, we use acronyms all the time. You can think of this as either MAP, meaningful, authentic, and practical, or AMP, authentic, meaningful, and purposeful, or PAM, purposeful, authentic, and meaningful. So you can use any of those acronyms if it helps you as something to kind of remember it. So when I moved to elementary teaching, I really took this philosophy of meaningful, purposeful, and authentic with me. And so that where it really came to life in the elementary classroom was when I was teaching grade 2. And this is how I opened my book. And if you've read the introduction, you have read this story, but I hope you don't mind that I share it again, because it was really such an important place in my career that really created the foundation for the rest of my work. So it was 2001. It was September. And as most of you will recall, that was the day that the planes hit the Twin Towers in New York City. It was a very traumatic day in all schools. And even though we weren't in an American school, we were in a Canadian school, it was a very traumatic time for the students in my classroom. They were in grade 2. They were living close to a military base. Many of them had parents in the military. And so there was a great deal of uncertainty and fear about, what was going to happen. Is my dad, is my mom going to have to go and fight in a war now, And so it was a really difficult time. And as I observed those children in the classroom, I noticed that the kids that were the most, sort of manage or were the most competent in managing the situation were the ones that, they had a solution to this. They were going to kapow this bad guy and they were going to smash, boom, bang, a sort of cartoon style. But they felt somehow in control. They felt somehow empowered. Where the others who didn't have those sort of feelings or things going on in their heads, they were really fearful. They were tearful, they're uncertain, there was nervousness and anxiety going on in the classroom. So I really felt, okay, I have to do something. Like, what can I possibly do? So I had a big roll of stickers that I had received from a parent at the beginning of the year. And when I first got them, I thought, oh my goodness, like, what am I going to do? It's 2,000 stickers. They were all just plain white, round stickers, about this big. Anyway, so I hauled them out of the cupboard. I found an old recording of Cat Stevens' Peace Train and played it on repeat over and over and over. And the kids made peace stickers. And we talked about peacemaking. We talked about peacekeeping. We talked about how peacekeeping and peacemaking can start in our homes, in our classrooms. It's not just something for grown-ups. And as we went on and we talked about this, the kids got really excited. And so they wanted to make more stickers, and could they take them to other classrooms? I said, yes. And so they were going off down the hall with reams of stickers. And before we knew it, the principal's shirt was covered in stickers, the caretaker, parents coming into the school, other students, teachers, everybody was covered in these stickers. And it sort of set, being September, early part of September, the 11th of September, it set a tone for the rest of the academic year with those children. And we really talked about how we could make a difference, even though, they were 7 years old, how they could really make a difference in their world. And it didn't, not just necessarily with peacemaking, but looking at environment, looking at all sorts of different things in their world. And so that was the foundation for it all. So taking my meaningful, authentic, purposeful that I had used in my adult education program, and coupling that with the enthusiasm that I saw in these youngest children to be able to make a difference in the world, I started developing this concept of students mentoring each other, working together, and creating things that were really useful and important in their lives. Can we have the next slide there, Lionel? And so when it came to mentoring, when I'm talking to these children, it occurred to me that what they were doing was not just helping each other in the classroom. They were actually mentoring each other. The ones that were stronger in some areas might not be the strongest students in other areas. And there was always a way that one student could mentor another. So mentoring each other for students, as opposed to for teachers, was not just about the more accomplished students mentoring those that were struggling or were less accomplished. It was about each student finding their own strengths and using that or their own skills. Perhaps one student was a great listener, and another student, was a strong writer, and another student knew a lot about, plants or, something that was part of our curriculum, animal habitats, which was in our curriculum in grade 1 at that time, or grade 2 at that time. So, everybody had something to give. And so when we celebrated that and we made students understand that they were valued and valuable to others, then the mentoring process really began. And people would say to me, what is it that you're doing with this mentoring? And there's a whole lot of words that fit in the blank that you see there on your screen. I mean, we can call it the act of mentoring, the art of mentoring. We can talk about the benefit of mentoring, the energy of mentoring, the gift of mentoring, the heart of mentoring. Those of you that have maintained contact over many years with someone who's mentored you in the past might talk about the legacy of mentoring. Other people more technically inclined might talk about the science of mentoring, the value of mentoring. But for me, I like to think of it as the spirit of mentoring, because the spirit of mentoring is something that crosses all age groups. It transcends, panels in school districts. It transcends different levels of education. And so for me, I always like to think about mentoring as something is where the spirit of mentoring kind of comes to us and we share it with others, regardless of us being more or less experienced than somebody else. Lionel? Thank you. So the three things that you'll notice in the title of the book, the three key words, are community and communication and collaboration. So if we start with these three items, they're all interdependent and also independent in many ways. But for me, the whole purpose of community is to act as a foundation for the other pieces. So community is the base level, the foundational level from which communication and collaboration actually grows. And so this quote from page 82 in the book says, the objective is not to control the classroom. Rather, it is to create an environment where students learn to self-regulate, collaborate, and build respectful relationships that result in a caring, learning community. And really, for me, that's what it's all about, because you cannot engage in meaningful, purposeful, and authentic activities within a classroom unless you really build strong relationships and you actually create that community. And so the community that you create then takes on ownership of the learning. They become engaged with the activities that are happening, and there becomes a natural process of reciprocal learning when everyone is engaged, when taking ownership and responsibility. The other piece that I find is really valuable in creating the community is to look at the community as a more routines-based rather than a rules-based setting. When there's a rules-based setting, that top-down mentality pervades everything that's happening in the classroom. These are the rules. And even if students sort of collaborate to create classroom rules at the beginning of the year, like, nobody's going to touch anybody else and we're all going to keep our voices moderated and that kind of thing, there's still that sort of sense of the rules that are holding it all down. Whereas when we look at routines, things that we do together as a team, as a classroom team, as a community, to make our lives better, more interesting, more fun, more engaging, then it's far easier for the kids in the classroom to take that ownership and to engage with what's happening. And I have a cute, and I swear, true story, this one. I was at a professional development meeting at the school, and there was a supply teacher booked. Unbeknownst to me, the supply teacher did not show up. Anyway, I got to school the next day, and the school secretary was there as I walked in there. She says, "You will never believe what happened yesterday." I'm thinking, oh no. As a teacher, like, don't we always think of the students in our classroom as our own kids? Like, oh, did they misbehave? She said, "You'll never believe it." She said, 9:15, I buzzed your classroom because there was no attendance sent to the office. And the kids said, "Oh, well, Mrs. Vetter's not here." And so they said, "Well, where's the supply teacher?" "Oh, we don't have one." And she said, the minute she told the principal, she says, "You've never seen the man run so fast down the hall up to my classroom." And he gets there, and there's 20 some kids, and they've all followed the routines. The weather was updated. We were counting up to 100 days of school at that time. So that, the popsicle sticks that we were doing is in groups of 10 to formulate our base 10 understandings. All of those things were done. The students were working with their manipulatives in their groups, doing their math, because we always did math first thing in the morning. And so, kids, even the youngest kids, and that was a grade 2 group, are really able to engage and take responsibility when they know the routines, when they have a sense of security, they know what to expect, and they also know they belong. They have a place they fit within that part of the routine. And so that for me is the importance of having a community. Lionel, can we go to the next screen? Thank you. This is an idea about community that maybe will work for you or maybe would not, but I feel that it's worthwhile sharing. And this is what I did one year when I was teaching grade 5. And if some of you are in from Quebec, you'll have noticed this story is on the blog as well, from the Ministry of Education in Quebec. But I had this grade 5, and I had a portable for the first time. I thought, ooh, I'm going to be so great. Like, I'm going to be away from the school a little bit. I'm going to have independence. I'm going to, sort of do my own thing out there. Anyway, I walked into that portable, and oh my goodness, my heart just dropped. Like, it was so dingy, and there was stuff everywhere. And I'm not a really good stuff person at the best of times, but there was just stuff everywhere. And so I got to work, and I cleared everything out of the portable, even the teacher's desk. It was this great big huge old cumbersome wooden desk. I had help getting it out, and then I moved the desks, as you can see in the slide here. I moved the desks into groups of 4. I had 28 kids in my class. I moved them into groups of and I smacked those desks bang up against the outer walls on both sides. I left the one end open because that's where our coat racks were, and I left the other end open because there was shelving and stuff down there. Some years when I tried this again, I did it in a horseshoe because of the situation. I didn't have to worry about coat racks. Coat racks are maybe in the hall or whatever. But anyway, so this is what I did. So I had 4 students in a group, and then I had all the desks turned so that the cubbies inside the desk were towards the middle so that nobody could put their junk in the cubbies. I didn't have to go looking for a notebook and find, somebody's lunch that was growing mold or whatever else. And so it left, as you can see, a huge amount of space in the center of the classroom. And so in the center of the classroom, I put a very low table. And on that table throughout the year, the course of the year, the contents changed. In the fall, there was beautiful leaves, or, we would be learning about something and somebody would bring something in and they put it on the table. And it really became a focal point for us because I'm sure when you're doing anything, for a full day, you are not 100% focused every minute of that day. At least I'm not. And so when when the kids, when their mind would start to wander or a little bit off task, they would, they could look towards the table, they could focus it. It would be kind of a place they could zone out to, not physically by moving there, but, sort of mentally zone out and look at that space. And so, and then what we would do is that when we wanted to talk about something or have a class meeting, we would all, and this was grade 5s, they would actually take their chairs and they would put their chairs in a circle around that table. And so we all sat in a circle and we could talk about things. And the first day I did it, oh my goodness, the noise and dragging chairs, I thought this is never going to work. But, perseverance does pay off. And sure enough, before, too long, those kids realized that, I can lift this chair. I really don't. It's not that heavy. I don't have to drag it across the ground. And I don't have to sit next to my best friend. I just have to, and if the circle is a little too small, we can just make a little bit bigger and always make room for somebody else to join our circle. And so this was what I did. And then on the shelves that I had at one end, I had milk crates. And I had textbooks, the math textbooks were in one milk crate, and the English notebooks, the language arts notebooks were in another crate. And so when it came time to do something, one person from each group would go and grab, 4 math texts, and the group's notebooks were bundled. And so somebody would go and grab, their notebooks or whatever. And so it really worked out well. And it gave us so much flexibility to do something. And it really helped the students to get together and to gather and to create community. Because in the morning, we would start our day gathered around the circle. Often that was just a brief gathering. And so we would stand. Then, later on at the end of the day, we would often gather again, but this time with our chairs, and we'd talk about things that interested us, bothered us, things that, weren't going too well, and problems that we had encountered during that day with our learning or with, interpersonal issues or whatever. So it was kind of a unique way to do it. And once I did it, I loved it. So it won't work for everybody, but if it has a chance to work for you, I mean, you can certainly give it a try. Come September, it's a great time to try something new. I wouldn't do this to kids right in the middle of the year once they're, used to something else. But in the beginning of the year, it really worked out well. Okay, Lionel. So that was sort of, how we were creating community. We were creating community by having a space that was welcoming and adaptable to different types of work. And we were creating community by making sure that everybody had a place in that environment. When it came to communication, we wanted to get that same kind of feeling. We wanted students to understand that, what I have to say is valuable, and it's okay for me to share it, and people aren't going to laugh at me. And one of my favorite quotes from research, anybody in education learned Vygotsky in their foundations courses in education. But one of my favorite quotes from Vygotsky is, "Thought is not just expressed in words, it comes into existence through them." And, if you think about that, how many times have you asked somebody a question? And as soon as that question is out of your mouth, all of a sudden your brain starts engaging and you know the answer and you think, oh, I didn't need to answer, or I didn't need to ask that question at all. And so when we allow students to sort of talk out loud, those brain processes of, expressing our thoughts into words, it brings those thoughts into sort of a more concrete existence, something that those kids can really work with. And so on page 18 of the book, there's an activity called Hear What I'm Thinking. And it basically is talking about students being introduced to a new idea of listening to what each other know, thinking about how they learn, how they know, and sort of just shifting sometimes into new ways of thinking. And I've got an example for you. It's on page 76. And it was a math activity that I did with a grade 2 class. So it was a simple subtraction problem. All they had to do was to, basically there was, somebody had 72 cents and somebody had 57 cents. Who had more? How much more? How do you know? And so I'm just going to read it here so I make sure I get it right. So the first student that did it said that they started at 72. They counted backwards and they used tally marks. And so they came up with 15. Another group of students said, well, they just looked at it from a place value, and they said, well, 72 is 7 groups of 10, and 57 is only 5 groups of 10. So, obviously, 72 is more. They didn't really care how much more. That they never really got to that part because they just sort of that was just far too simple. Another group, they started at 72 and they counted up. Sorry, they counted 57 and counted up to 72, and they used counters to do that. And then one group, this one just blew me out of the water. So they said, well, we know that 57 is really 50 plus 7 more. So if we take the 72 and we take away the 50, that gives us 22. And then we've got 7 left that we haven't used yet. So we take the 7 away from the 22 and we've got 15. And so there we had so many different ways of thinking about things, about looking at mathematics, about looking at subtraction as finding the difference between two numbers and not just takeaways. And also looking at the whole concept of friendly numbers, like 50 is a far friendlier number to subtract from 72 than 57. And so from that, we started not only as students, but also myself as a teacher. I talked a lot more about what was going on in my head and how I was thinking. And I kind of asked myself, well, what if I told the students more stories about my experience and how I learn so that they might use them as jumping off points into their own inquiries? And so that's what we did. Lionel. So I'm just checking my time here. Good. All righty. So the next part of communication that we looked at was the difference between learning to talk and talking to learn. So learning to talk, we all, we know that quite well. There's lots of activities. Students learn to talk from, a very young age. A lot of it's environmental. A lot of it's helped by classroom teaching. But talking to learn is a totally different experience. And an example of how we did that in the classroom is that we asked students to take an actual activity that they would normally be doing, such as writing a story. But instead of just writing it and handing it in, or writing something and handing it in, they had to then read it aloud to somebody else in the classroom. And so they would read it aloud, and then interestingly enough, as they read aloud, they would all of a sudden be editing in their heads. That doesn't sound, oh, okay, got to fix that. Oh, no, that doesn't sound good. Oh. And all of a sudden, the things that normally I would have been correcting in the margins with a red pencil when that piece of work got handed in were edited by 2 students together. And the students could talk it through, and they could actually make the talk part of the learning experience. And so my question that sort of grew from that experience was, what if talking to learn became the norm in the classroom? And that students learn to share, explore, investigate, question, discuss, agree, and disagree, but in respectful ways that valued alternate opinions and the potential of the alternate opinions to enhance and develop thinking in new and innovative ways. And so that was a really important piece because it can be intimidating to read your writing to somebody else and feel that it's being judged by somebody else. But if there's a back and forth happening, that people are doing this regularly in the classroom, and it's not wrong to be wrong. It's okay to not know something. Then that gives every student the opportunity to really want to participate as part of the community. And it allows your community not just to be sort of fixed groups of these 4 kids all sit together, but kids can maneuver around in the classroom, and one day they might sit in this group and another day they might sit in that group. And again, because the desks were all pushed so that nobody had their personal possessions, everybody's personal possessions were on the back of their chair and their knapsack, which could be moved to any chair they were sitting in. It gave the students opportunities to get to know each other well, to communicate with a variety of people that thought in a variety of different ways, and to broaden their own horizons as a result. Okay, Lionel, next page. Thank you. Okay, so collaboration. Collaboration can be a challenge in classrooms because sometimes collaboration just means that kids just are, they're talking, they're not focused. And so I found that what I really needed to do, if I wanted collaboration to work, to really expand students' thinking and to deepen their understanding, I had to, for many of the students, not all, but for many of the students, I had to begin with something very concrete to encourage them to share. So what I did is what I called patterned writing. And if you look, I've just got 2 titles here, but there's several titles that I've used for this, and they're all listed in the book as well on page 67. But if you look at, you're probably familiar with that poem, The House That Jack Built. This is the cat that ate the rat, or that lived in the house that Jack built. And there's been a lot of different variations built on this theme. And this particular one, The House That Crack Built, is fabulous for grade 8 students or even older into secondary schools. And it basically is, talk about cause and effect of drug problems. And you can use it with any kinds of ideas. So, you could say, this is the water bottle I threw away. Well, then what happens from there with that water bottle? Maybe it ended up being recycled. And maybe it didn't. Maybe it lay in a gutter, and maybe it's still in a landfill 50 years from now. The process of different things that you can write about based on a pattern from a very simple book. If you give a moose a muffin, I think probably most people, and even I found even grade 8 students love this because they know this story. If you give a moose a muffin, there's, if you give a mouse, I can't remember what you give a mouse, but anyways, there's a whole series of books. I think you give a mouse a cookie. So if you start as if you give a kid a pencil, so what happens? If you give a friend a hug, what happens? Take it all from there. If you give some kindness away, what happens from there? And there's other books too. Another one that I love is called The Important Book by Margaret Wise Brown. And in that book, she talks about, the importance of a spoon, or a whole different pages of different things. But one is the importance of a spoon is that you can eat with it. And then she's got 3 or 4 other attributes of a spoon. But the important thing about a spoon is that you eat with it. So and I have given this to students in the university when we were learning about community, and curiosity. The important thing about community is working in a group of 4. They have to have the most important thing, and then 3 or 4 attributes, and then again closing with that same most important thing. You can work on it in mathematics. The most important thing about geometry is you can work for it in a topic in science. The most important thing about electricity is, and all of a sudden it forces kids and engages kids in communicating. Well, why do you think that's most important? Well, did you consider this? And, back and forth. So it's a wonderful opportunity based on some really simple books that kids are already engaging with to do some creative work, but also to really look deeply and to deepen our understandings into certain topics. Thank you, Lionel. The next slide, please. Okay, so once we get past, the stage of students where we're really having to work with them into collaboration when they're all of a sudden getting, ooh, this is kind of cool. We've learned this starting in September, and we're really enjoying this. So then the next sort of stage of that development is developing what I call a treasure map to learning. And there are other researchers who have different names for this. Actually, if you're looking for something to look, Vivian Vasquez, who wrote Negotiating Critical Literacies for Young Children, she does something, she calls them audit trails, where she actually literally covers the classroom walls with, a track of where the kids have researched and what they've done. But for me, I found this one, this type of thing handy. And so, you create it with any topic that you're working on in the curriculum. And you start with, so this particular one I used, which is a primary curriculum, daily weather. And so then, all right, so what do we want to learn about that if we're in grade 1? Well, we might want to learn about measuring temperature. We might want to learn about dressing for the weather. And, this is how the kids create it too. And it also comes through, well, there might be things that really aren't in the curriculum that are still really interesting that you can, make use of their interest in those things to develop other, perhaps language, media, and other types of curriculum expectations. So, extreme weather, for an example, weather around the world, weather and animals. How does, grade 1, that's, how is the weather affecting polar bears, and how is the weather affecting tree frogs in the Amazon? And then, thinking about what I've learned and the questions that I still have, and then sharing this treasure, because by the time I've done all this work and I've learned all these things, this is a real treasure that I've got. And so if we think of that learning as a treasure, then kids want to, other kids want to share in that treasure and that type of thing. So the important thing about this is that, it works in grade 1. It also works in grade 10 for Earth and space systems, if they're, talking about climate change and Earth's dynamic climate in the grade 10 curriculum. You obviously have different topics. They're probably not looking about dressing for the weather in grade 10, but there's so many different ways that they can look through once we start thinking about the learning is collaborating together, to build this treasure. So, it broadens their learning skills, it strengthens their curiosity, and also it values not knowing, because all of these pieces are something that we don't really already know. And so it shows that, hey, that's valuable too. So, all righty, here we go. So this brings us now to reimagining the future. And as Lionel alluded to in the introduction, I'm now a grandmother. I have the luxury of being retired, but I'm also keenly still involved in education and working in different education environments. But I can take the time to really think about what I like, what I don't like, and how I might reimagine the future. And so this is chapter 5 in the book. And for me, chapter 5 is really the gift that I gave myself, because I let my imagination run wild. I took the things that or the sort of philosophies that underpin some of my other work earlier chapters, such as using what I call what if thinking. I use that all the time with students. I use it when I assess students. Students are either at the what stage of understanding, or they move up into the how stage of understanding, or they move up into the why stage of understanding, or they're at the what if stage. Like, I really get this. And now, like, well, what if, that's that child in that math problem that said, I got this. Well, what if I don't even worry about the 7 and 57, and I only take the 50 away from 72, and then I bring the 7 back in later? That's the different levels. And so for me, I feel now that I had that opportunity in my education learning to really move into that what if zone. And I encourage you to do that so often if you can, and not to be held back by the things that seem to bind us as teachers, regulations and curriculum, and just think, like, what if I moved the furniture around in my classroom? What if I got rid of a lot of the junk in there that I don't need? What if I didn't allow the students to have their own desk so that when they came in the door, I could give them a playing card, that it was a 4 of hearts, and whoever had a 4, whether it's 4 of hearts, 4 of spades, 4 of diamonds, or 4 of clubs, all those 4 kids who had number 4 sat in group 4 that day, and they got to know new people. And so I had all of these sort of what if things going around in my head. And when you have what if thinking, it allows students to mentor each other. It allows you to mentor me and me to mentor you, because your what ifs might be completely different than mine. They might be things I've never even thought about. And hearing your what ifs absolutely enrich my learning and enrich my future. And so this quote from page 97 says, "I believe that each of us, student or teacher, is a mentor. So celebrate the ways in which we can all look to the future, support each other's learning, and collaborate to create new ways of thinking and being in the world. To do so, we must not only challenge what is in our classrooms, but visualize what might be. In other words, what if?" And so at the end now, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I reimagine. And some of these might be, pipe dreams, and some of them are really workable things. So Lionel, if we could look to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So when I was reimagining the future, I thought, well, what if I looked at the curriculum not as something that I went through and ticked off expectations, but something that was a tool, not unlike a piece of chalk or a computer or an iPad, but something that was a tool to help me build students and create students' enthusiasm, and to build their learning in different ways with a focus that wasn't necessarily curriculum driven. And so I thought of, okay, so if I was going to do that, what are the things that are important to me? What really matters to me that I want for children today in the classroom? What do I want for my grandchildren? And the first thing that I thought of was well-being. And well-being is so important to every child. How can we have children that are going to be absolutely capable and competent learners, who are going to embrace learning and really enjoy every moment of it, if they don't have that sense of well-being in the classroom? And so if we take well-being as sort of a core piece of what we offer to students in the classrooms, and I won't call it curriculum, but just call it sort of like a core foundational piece. If we offer that to students, then what they learn from the curriculum can be so much better. And an example of that, on page 105, I have an activity or an action strategy. Actually, I should have mentioned that at the beginning. There's 30 action strategies in the book. Happy Slippers is one of them. And Happy Slippers came because when I first started decorating my classroom one year, happy faces were all the rage. Everything was happy faces in the dollar store, everywhere else. And so I used the inexpensive, and I did the blue and yellow, and I put happy faces all over the place. Well, before I knew it, I had, Christmas time happy face earrings. I had happy face mugs. I had a happy face, you name it. Anyways, and one child gave me a pair of happy face slippers, great big yellow fluffy slippers with a happy face on them. And so I put them in the back of the classroom, and obviously, it didn't wear them when the kids were in the classroom. I always had my shoes on, and a big joke with me was I always had high-heeled shoes on. But anyway, so one day things weren't going too well in the classroom, and I guess I was allowing my frustration with what was happening to show. And so one of the children went to the back of the classroom and got these big yellow fluffy slippers and brought them to me and said, "Mrs. Vetter, I think you need your happy slippers now." And I thought, oh my goodness, this little girl knew me so well. And I really did. I slipped off my high-heeled shoes, put on those happy slippers, looked at that little face, and it just was something that turned my whole way of being in the classroom at that moment around. And so I thought of that and I called this strategy my Happy Slippers strategy, because it's not just one strategy, but it's a way of thinking of different strategies that students can use when they're feeling like that in the classroom, when they're feeling stuck. Looking at that center table was one of them. There's a million different things that kids can do to just refocus, to step back, to zone out, to come back to the learning a few minutes later when they're more ready to engage. And so that was my happy slippers strategy. And I thought if we did this more often, if we gave children those opportunities to not just, sort of feel frustrated, but to stop, step away, decompress, put on their virtual happy slippers, what if? Like what might that change in the classroom? I know it changed a lot for me. The next thing I thought about in these foundational pieces was citizenship. And I thought, if I want students to really gain something from my classroom, what do I want? And I really wanted that to be a sense of citizenship. That it's almost like, I was going to call this section community, but it was more than that. I wanted those students to understand their role as a vibrant and valuable and necessary piece of the world, of citizenship, of learning, of creating, and of being part of the future. I mean, they are the future. And so one of the strategies, this one on page 110, is there was one called Wonder Walls, and I love this one. I saw this at a conference, and I wish I could give credit to the teacher that presented it, because it was fabulous, but I don't recall, sadly, that teacher's name. If anybody recognizes this and says, oh, I know that was Mrs. So-and-so, let me know. I'd love to say thank you. But anyway, so there was a picture of this, just a flip chart, and it was kindergarten kids, and it was called Wonder Walls, a wonder wall. And the kids had written, they were studying the human body in kindergarten. And one of the kids had written, I wonder how my skin stays on. And the spelling, when you saw it, you would love it. It was like S-T-A-Z, I wonder how my skin stays on. And it really struck me as funny because, looking in the mirror, some days I think, well, I wonder how my skin stays on too, because it's not staying on quite as snugly as it used to. But, it was such a fun thing. And then the next kid, inspired by that first thinking, had written, I wonder why my eyes don't fall out. Wow, what a cool question, and so I think, once we get kids thinking more broadly, thinking about all sorts of things in the world, not just about, health things or things in the curriculum, but using a wonder wall to think about things that interest students, whether it might be plants or environment, or whether it might be, what's happening in my neighborhood, or, what's happening in the world, and, Wonder Walls were a wonderful way to do it. And then the last piece that I would think of is, I thought, okay, if I had to talk to students and create something for them that I felt would really benefit them as part of this foundation, it would be an understanding of stewardship, their role in nature, in what's happening in the classroom, is even community building as part of stewardship of the school, the school environment, and legacy. What are they leaving behind them? Like, what do they want? What's important to them? So on page 112, there's an action strategy, and it's called Nature Nurtures, and it really talks about getting kids outside more. I loved having kids outside. I taught at a school one time where they actually had the prep teacher took every class outside, even in, obviously not dreadful weather, but, if it was raining or if it was snowing, she bundled them all up and they all went out. And that was and they did so much interesting work learning outside. And there's so much research now about this, the Japanese thoughts about what they call tree bathing, translates in English into tree bathing, where people, even executives, are given time off work to go out into nature and just calm themselves down and open their minds so that they can create deeper thinking. And so, I thought about that. Well, why can't we just, think more about stewardship and what we're leaving behind, and get kids thinking more broadly by taking them outdoors, and the stress of the classroom environment, which for many, just the noise or the four walls can be challenging for some kids. Get them outside, As a school, think about what could we do? What if we turned that piece of the front yard into something different, into something greater? And there's also some stories in the book about something that we did, building a school garden where every single kid in the school had their place in creating the garden. Even the little ones lay newspaper down and ran the hose over it so that the weeds wouldn't come up. And the grade eights were, wood chipping when it was finished. So there's just so many things to do when we think about moving outdoors, and you'll find all that in the book too. So Lionel, last slide. So we're about 45 minutes into our webinar, or maybe a little bit longer, I guess. Oh, because of Lionel's piece, 52 minutes into our webinar. We have a few minutes left if you have some questions, or if you would like to email me. This is my contact information. It's vettereducation@gmail.com. I love to hear from teachers about how mentoring is unfolding in your classrooms, or the challenges you're facing, or what you think of some of my ideas, even those of you that don't think they're great ideas. So thank you to everybody for coming out tonight. And Lionel, back to you.
That's great, Diane. Thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed that. I have a couple thoughts, maybe just to kind of before we move to close. And we do have a lucky draw at the end where someone will win an ebook copy of your book. But before that, just a thank you for the last 45 minutes. And I think you've taken the word mentoring and fleshed it out completely. And when you talk about the spirit of mentoring, I think that takes it farther than maybe what many folks might be thinking when they first heard the title of your book. I like how there's a couple frameworks in there where you talk about, I think what you were saying there in terms of the structure and how you organize your class, it allows you to build community, communication and collaboration. But I'm wondering if I was a new teacher, and I know there's someone here, I think it was Rocco, who's working on pre-service, and I suspect there's others. How do you take someone who's new, or maybe someone who's been around for a while and wants to change? There seems to be a bit of a power dynamic change here. Like even though we're all mentoring, and what was the comment? Everyone has something to give. As the teacher, do you have to give something up to get something back? And from that traditional role of, well, I'm the teacher of the classroom, to, no, this is a community. We all have something. Do people ever ask you about that when you sort of explain what you're doing here?
Well, I think there's that traditional notion of mentoring as top down. I'm more experienced, and so I will mentor you. But I think particularly in teacher education and in schools, and the way education is moving towards, with digital, computer information and resources. I mean, there are so many people who are experts in so many different things and are learning independently, whether they be students or whether they be colleagues. There's really no reason why there needs to be that power dynamic. And, certainly it still exists, I think. But I think the more we talk about it, the more we involve teachers, as we did with the mentoring each other and the NTIP program, and sort of reminding even experienced teachers that the biggest joy of having a teacher candidate in your classroom is to learn from them, as well as to be able to support them in their learning. It's such a reciprocal relationship. It's not always in practice, but it certainly can be, and it's such a benefit to both parties.
Totally agree. And then, just as I know we come to the end here, right near the beginning, you mentioned 3 words, and they're through your presentation in the book, and it's this idea of purposeful, meaningful, and authentic. Is that sort of, I think your bio is 30 years of experience. Is that your experience? Did those sort of evolve out, or are those something that's always kind of been with you? Because I think we always look at something and go, do we use it? Do we not use it? And those seem like three great words, and I'm a big fan of having things in 3 because I can remember that, right? So did that take a while to sort of cull down to that, or has that always kind of been part of your mantra?
I mean, it's always been my goal, my objective, and I think it really just came out of necessity when I was teaching these military officers who were so highly educated and had so much life and world experience. And here was me, as a much younger teacher, trying to teach them the English language, and it kind of evolved naturally. Like this, I have to do something to really engage these students, and what am I going to do? And so that was how I kind of developed those 3 words, and used them as my mantra way back then. And then when I went into elementary teaching, they followed me because it made so much sense. And it's not just something that works in one environment, and they can, be used across, university teaching or adult education or elementary teaching, secondary teaching. It's a good thing to do with any learner.
Great. Great. Well, it's I know we're right at the end here, folks, and so Dan, maybe I'll just I'll just do a brief, quick thank you to you, and then we'll do our lucky draw at the end, and let folks know who is the winner of your ebook from there. So, but I will say, Melinda nicely says it here in the chat where she talks about fantastic presentation with many practical suggestions. And I think even the few you gave us in the 30 that you have actions strategies there, take this from a theoretical basis, which I hope I captured there, that I think is really great, and but then makes it practical as well, whether you're a new teacher or someone who's been around for a few years and maybe starting to get a few gray hairs in there somewhere. There's something there for everyone. So on behalf of the whole group here, thank you so much for taking the time this evening, especially at the end of August, when I know is a busy time for everybody. So thank you very much for the presentation this evening.
You're most welcome, and thank you to all of you. It's always a pleasure.
Great. Good. Thank you. And just folks, before we go, no one has left, so we're all we're still all waiting. And just to remind you, notice at the top of the chat, if you would, your next purchase when you go to pembrokepublishers.com, if you would like $5 off, hopefully of Diane's book, Students Mentoring Students, you just have to put in after you order, you put in the code SMS23, and it will automatically take off $5 for that. And we may have to scroll back up again, but just a reminder, our next session is, I put in the chat there, September 21st at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll have Jennifer Kelly talking about her book, Active Reading Classrooms. And we invite you all to go to the link will be in the email that comes out tomorrow with the recording, and you'll be able to go straight to that to register as well. And we would love to have you join us for that. And our last piece here, we're just going to do what we call our lucky draw. It looks like we might have just see if we have a new system in place here. So it doesn't look like it's I think the problem here is that I had to set it up and I made a boo-boo here. So I'm just going to say a number between 1 and 50, Diane. If you give me a number between 1 and 50, I will mention tomorrow in the recording when the email comes out who the winner is, and we'll be contacting them. So just a random number between 1 and 50, and I'll pick it from the folks that attended tonight.
Oh, my lucky number's 13.
There we go. That was my plane seat on the way out, 13B. So there you go. Great. Okay, super. Thanks, Dan. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. We will be sending out an email tomorrow. It'll have a link to this recording. It'll say identify the winner of our lucky draw for an ebook and have the information for you to sign up for our next session on September 1st. So with that, have a good evening, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.